What's up, guys? It's your boy Wimpy, back with another podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about a penguin, and Jesus. So, might have showed up on y'all's feeds, but recently a penguin's been going viral. There was a documentary about penguins up north, and in the documentary, they're documenting this penguin, right? So, the camera zooms in on these penguins. Like 3 of them are going towards the water to go eat, kill some fish, and get some food. Then another guy, he decides to head back to the colony, back to the community. And there's one in the center that's just kind of sitting there. He's like thinking. We don't know what's going through this penguin's head, of course. But then he decides, he's just going to book it for the mountains. He just starts walking towards the mountains. The mountains are like 70 kilometers away, if I remember correctly. And it's far, far, far away from any food that this penguin can get. And, of course, far away from the colony. So it's certain death. And then the guy who's recording it, or voicing it over, he asks, but why? Why is the penguin going towards the mountains? Why is he walking towards his death? All right. So there's many ways we can interpret this. All right. This is very symbolic. We don't really know what's going on in that penguin's head, but it went viral for a reason, because that's how a lot of people feel. Okay. And that might be how a lot of people feel, but not a whole lot of people have the balls to actually go and walk towards their death, to leave the pack and go towards certain death, to stray from the community. A lot of people want to fit in and, work a decent job so they can pay their bills and eat, and never strive for anything greater than themselves. They just want to stay in their box, stay in their community. They don't want to say anything to piss people off. They don't have the balls to do that. They don't have the balls to face down the barrel of a gun and accept their death. They just want to stay in their nice little bubble, okay? That's the rest of the penguins. But there are a few penguins that has the balls to walk towards the mountains, right? And the reason this pertains to what Jesus is talking about, and this might fit in with my previous few podcasts, but Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me, okay? What does that mean, picking up your cross and following him? That means you're picking up your cross to go die, all right, for his sake, all right? In the verses right after that, he says, those who cling to their lives will lose it, and those who lose their lives gain it, all right? So there's a very philosophically deep interpretation of this, okay? Of course, I don't know what Jesus meant by that. If I was there when he said it, I could interpret it. Or, well, potentially, I don't really know, because it's not going to happen. But that penguin, he lost his life. He gave up his life. He forgot about, staying in the community where it's safe, where he can get food and stuff. He went straight for the mountains. He lost his life. But in a way, he gained it, because now he's truly living. Now he's living life on the edge, experiencing it to its fullness. All right? Life is for the gambler. All right? There's no nobility in playing small and staying in your little box. Those who cling to their lives, like the rest of that colony, that just wants to stay comfortable, they lose their lives. They just live the same day over and over and over and over again. Eat, shit, sleep, repeat, procreate, have kids, all right? Grow up, go through school, get a fancy, nice job, pay the mortgage, get married, have kids, all right? Retire. Live the rest of your life doing the same thing, sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. Die. Those people who cling to their lives, they lose it. They don't truly live, okay? Nietzsche's quote, okay? I'm just spitballing here, going off the top of my head, because slideshows are pretty boring. But he said in his untimely meditations, his essays, that there's no greater purpose than to die trying to accomplish the great and the impossible, okay, or pursuing the great and the impossible. So I'm gonna get into that for how that is for me, but it's different for everybody. All right, you might have some big dreams, but it might seem impossible. Okay, first you gotta believe in it, and then you gotta attempt it, but you gotta realize that there's a possibility that you might die on the way there. You might die on the way to the mountains. All right, life isn't guaranteed, but life is gonna be sweeter. Okay, I mean, there's going to be a lot more suffering. You're not going to have fish to eat, and you're not going to have a community there to have your back. You're going to be on your own, all right? But you're going to be experiencing life to the fullness, experiencing things that the majority of the population don't have the balls to experience, all right? So you have to go towards those mountains. And for how this pertains to me is, my mountain is the kingdom of God. That's the goal I'm striving for, trying to wake people up, trying to point people towards the Gospels, to what Jesus actually said instead of that junk they teach in the churches. Churches are completely full of shit, all right? Completely, all right? And, sure, there's some outliers out there, okay, that might actually have a good gospel. But it's nice, the community's nice. That's why a lot of people go to church. It's a nice community because you're lonely and you need a group to fit into, all right, so you can escape from the suffering. But that's not what Jesus said. He didn't say run from the suffering and get into your community. No, he wants you to separate yourself from the pack and follow him, okay, to your death. That's what he was talking about. Nobody's going to go to church if they walk through the doors and the preacher's like, hey, guys, you want to sign up for our church group? You're going to have to die, all right? That's great. No, nobody's going to do that, all right? And they don't emphasize that. American Christians don't understand what it's like to be persecuted, okay? They live in their nice little communities, nice little comfortable box. They don't understand, all right? I have a lot of respect for Christians in China or Christians in Armenia, somewhere where they're actually getting persecuted, where they are actually dying for their beliefs, okay? They're actually having their faith tested. Here in the United States, we have the prosperity gospel. Go to church, donate a little money, then go back to work so you can buy that new Bentley. Pick up your Bentley and follow me. That's the gospel being taught here, all right? And I'll talk about how the Trinity's a load of shit sold by a council under Emperor Constantine, which is very anti what Jesus said, because Jesus resisted the temptation to power. And I was getting drugged into that, right? And so in the previous podcast, I was getting drugged into the political realm. I was getting drugged into the muck, starting to think that if we put in the right politicians or if we get the politicians to do the right things, we can make things better. That's not at all what this is about. This is about a spiritual awakening, a psychological awakening. I'm on the point that, psychological operations are a thing, and we can't really tell what's going on, all right, because that's the nature of psychological operations. It's all about deceit, deceiving people. And we can get into who's behind that, Maybe it is the devil. Maybe it's the devil just fooling the world, getting them to kill each other and fight over money, But that's beside the point. We can't really prove it, at least not yet, all right? But the battle we're fighting here isn't a political battle. It's not about getting power or, getting Christians into office. It's about spreading the gospel, getting people to change their minds, to actually change, not just go to church once a week and continue to be the same person, all right, or get dunked in the water just to come right back out to go back to their job to buy a new Bentley, all right? We need to awaken people in a way that they're willing to die for what they believe in, all right? To pick up the cross and follow Jesus, all right? So I understand, I try to put myself in Jesus' shoes to the best that I can know, and it's sad, all right, in a way. But I understand why he just wanted people to believe in him. I get that, because that's all I want either. I don't want you to give me money. I don't want you to do nice things for me, all right? I just want you to believe in me. That's all I want. That's all I ask. Because if I get enough people to believe in me, then I might actually start to make a difference, okay? And that's the problem, with trying to attempt the great and the impossible, because most people aren't going to understand what you're saying, right? And Friedrich Nietzsche's last book he wrote, which people claim is his magnum opus, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Zarathustra, he spends a lot of time in the mountains in solitude, gaining wisdom. Then he comes out of the mountains to preach to people, his great idea, the Übermensch, all right? But it falls on deaf ears. Most people don't listen to it. Most people don't understand what he's talking about, because most people don't spend the time to study philosophy or look inwards, all right? They're always looking outwards. They're looking at what their neighbor got, or, that big yacht that they want, or them bitches over there. How can I get them into my bed, right? It's a bunch of distractions. Nobody actually spends the time to look inwardly, all right, to actually study the universe. So, John 14:12, I'm paraphrasing here again, but Jesus says that those who believe in me and do what I say will go on to do these works, and greater works than these shall they do, because I am going to the Father. How do I interpret that? Me personally, I don't think Jesus is coming back, right? And yeah, I could be wrong. But Jesus didn't do what needed to be done, or he didn't finish what needed to be done. He did what he needed to do, I believe. Everything happens for a reason. Everything's going exactly according to plan, all right? But the conditions of world peace, everybody doing what God says, obeying God, loving your neighbor as yourself, loving God, loving him, all right? Or, well, him wouldn't be, these are just words, God's a lot bigger than words. We can't really understand God. But if I believe in Jesus and I believe in what he said, and I want to finish what he started, I want to finish building the kingdom of God, greater works than these shall I do. All right? That's the great and the impossible for me. This is a long shot, right? I run this idea by a lot of people, and they just scoff at me. Like, oh, that's not possible. That's not possible. That's what they tell me. Well, that's not going to stop me. I'm going to keep trying, right? I don't like coming on here a lot of times because, my mind gets to me sometimes. I'll admit that. All right, sometimes I lay in bed, I'm like, well, maybe I said something wrong, or maybe I got too worked up. It doesn't matter, all right? I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to do a job, all right? And I got to keep trying. Even if I don't finish this job, even if I die in the process or nobody listens to me, I still got to try, all right? And that's the same for everything. Don't quit, okay? Just keep moving forward. That's all it takes, with the understanding that you might not even accomplish what you're set out to accomplish, that you might die in the process, because nothing is guaranteed, all right? And that's the meaning of faith, guys. Faith is uncertainty. Without uncertainty, we wouldn't have faith, okay? Then it'd just be bargains. And that's a problem we have nowadays. People don't want to act on faith. They need certainty, right? There's an uncertainty in going towards a mountain, walking towards a mountain, separating yourself from the herd. One of the best things I've ever done was dropping out of college, separating myself from the herd. Yes, it's caused me a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And there's times where I've been weak, I thought of quitting. But I kept going. And now I feel like I'm a lot wiser than I ever could have been if I just stuck with the herd, go through college, do what everybody else is doing. Because usually what everybody else is doing is wrong, okay? Doing a inward journey, trying to figure out who I am, exploring, jumping out into the wilderness. You know, the Israelites, they had to wander through the wilderness for 40 years before they entered the promised land. And Moses' generation didn't get to enter because they didn't believe, right? But, yeah, just wandering, heading towards that mountain, right? And Albert Camus, I'll bring him up too. The Myth of Sisyphus. People say that's one of his best books. Now, see, with Nietzsche, I'll bring them up because I think they're very intelligent people. Nietzsche, you know, a lot of modern philosophy is built off Nietzsche. I'm always going to take Dostoevsky over Nietzsche. Nietzsche himself said that Dostoevsky was like the only guy he ever had anything to learn from. But I disagree with a lot of their philosophies, right? They make the assumption that God isn't real, okay? That's where their philosophies are built from. Okay, but I still like a lot of their ideas, right? Albert Camus came up with absurdism in The Myth of Sisyphus, but I like The Myth of Sisyphus, or the way he portrays it. Sisyphus was punished by the gods because he tricked them several times. His punishment for that was to push a boulder up a hill, and then once it got to the top, it would only roll right back down so he could start again. And he'd do that for the rest of eternity. That's how it feels a lot of times, you know. Even with your mundane job, all right? You just feel like you're pushing that boulder up the hill just for it to fall right back down so the next day you could push it right back up again. And especially when you're trying to accomplish the great and the impossible, when you're trying to head towards that mountain, you're going to feel like you're pushing a boulder up a mountain. And it feels like you're going nowhere, you know. You're just wasting time. But Albert Camus says, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Even though he's going to have to push that boulder over and over and over again, only to get nowhere, he's still going to be happy. You have to find enjoyment in pushing that boulder up the hill. Embrace the suck, all right? Like what all those Navy SEALs tell you about. Embrace the suck, all right? Don't run from it. Don't cling to your life, but embrace the suck. Lose your life, and then you gain it, all right? So, that's that, you know? And the problem with this is, like, it's not going to go viral, all right? Well, it might, by some miracle. But this stuff I'm talking about here isn't for the average man, not for the common man. This is for the people who want more, who are tired of working their 9 to 5, who are tired of doing the same thing every day. They want to head towards that mountain. They want to head for that goal. And what I'm telling you here is not what everybody else says. Go to the gym, get jacked, right? Then work sales, call 100 people a day, blah, 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 get rich, you know? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is pick out something that nobody else does. Everybody wants to be rich. Everybody wants to be rich. Everybody wants to be famous. I'm telling you to aim even higher, you know? Look inward, somewhere that nobody else has gone, and start walking towards that mountain. And I'm not telling you that you're going to get there. I'm not telling you that if you believe hard enough or if you visualize it, you're going to get to the mountain and you're going to be okay. No, I'm telling you that you might possibly die. I'm telling you, you might possibly starve to death, or you might be persecuted, or you might lose your mind, right? Nietzsche lost his mind, right? I'm just telling you to start walking and figure it out as you go, and not to be afraid of your death, okay? But to embrace your death, and only then will you start to live. That's what I got for you guys. But be good, and try to stay warm, right?